Welcome to another Propagandacast Lehr with me, your host, Imperial Dane. We'll be moving on to another brief episode today. The lesson for today will be repair tactics. It's indeed repair tactics, more specifically the sort of theory and ideas that goes into sort of swiftly getting your panzers or tanks repaired and back onto the battlefield with as little trouble as possible. The best methods, the safest methods, and so on. And, you know, also sort of the ideas as to why you want to actually get it done that way, besides perhaps the obvious. And of course, again, the question becomes, you know, why do you sort of actually want to care about this? And that's the thing, I mean, overall, if you don't really give so much of a crap about it, you're just going to stand around, for example, with a heavy tank of this IS-2, and, you know, have it standing out for several minutes of the game without doing anything. And for example, in this case, you know, looking at this one, which is almost Veterancy 2, and in fact, if it was Veterancy, that would just be a huge waste of resource. Not just, of course, the tank itself, which is quite expensive, but then, of course, also the following Veterancy, which then just goes to waste. And just sort of starting up the match, I mean, this is going to take ages to get done. And of course, we can run here comparison with several pioneers working on the other pans. Of course, that's less help, but just note, I mean, we're talking seconds, and it's done already.
It's done. Ready.
I mean, likely if Hans here, the gentleman here pops on and begins repairing his Tiger tank, of course, that's always going to be nice. Though, of course, one thing to keep in mind when it comes to repairing tanks, don't move it. Don't move it. Otherwise, they won't begin repairing. But again, note here, this is taking quite some time. Of course, it sort of began about 30 minutes. Let's see how long until this IS-2 is ready. And there you go, Pioneers got wiped out. A bit poorly done there. And of course, it only needs one squad to repair the Tiger tank. There we go, still repairing. Still repairing. Still repairing again. That's about close to 2 minutes now with that IS-2 not really doing much in the fight. Also, another thing here to consider, actually, that's actually the positioning of the tank while he's repairing it. It's actually quite exposed. I mean, if the enemy was to launch some sort of daring attack from here, I mean, that IS-2 would be in a lot of trouble, pretty exposed. Same with the repairing Pioneers. Or combat engineers, whatever. And of course, now it's of course almost done, but again, had it been in half health, that would have been a lot more unpleasant for, you know, Obscura in this case. Generally, one good thing to try and actually do while you're repairing your tanks is sort of get them reasonably where you want to usually have something in between your tanks and any opponent's possible attack. For example, right around here would be a much better spot than actually been something, you know, covering from the enemy directly moving up and begin shooting out. If that was also mean, of course, the engineers repairing it would also been covered and ensured. And generally, also as another rule of thumb, the more damaged your tank is, or for that matter, if it's actually got a damaged engine, you want it farther away from the front lines. If you're talking about this much health left, well, a lot of this health left, you know, there's on this damage, I mean, fair enough, this close, alright. Not a huge threat, but again, you still want it done. But then again, if it's like, you know, down to this amount of health, for example, got a damaged engine, you generally, you know, want it back. And again, you know, you might not be able to get it far away, though, with a damaged engine. Of course, that's again where the bit about you're trying to position something between the general direction of your opponent and the tank, so that way they can't directly shoot at it. So that again is something right to remember, otherwise you will of course run into some issues here. Also generally, again, you just want more than one engineer or combat pioneer squad actually doing the repairs, otherwise it's just going to take ages. In particular, for example, if you actually take something like a Tiger tank, which actually has some of the most health in the game for the tank, I mean, that's really going to take a long time to get fully repaired. And again, just we're about 2.5 minutes, that was for IS-2 about down to half health. And then you can sort of figure out if it's almost fully wiped out, you know, it's only with a sliver of health left. That's going to be about 5 minutes. 5 minutes. A lot of things can happen in a 5 minutes where your tank isn't doing anything that can't help. So again, generally, you want more than one tank actually doing the repair, well, engineer doing the repair work on your tanks. The more, the better. 2 is sort of the preferred minimum. 3 is all right. In fact, good. There's very much something to keep in mind while repairing your tanks. I'll just sort of move on here, just briefly stop and then sort of move on to the next example, because I mean this is just one part of it. There are a lot of things, a lot of thoughts that actually go into this. I mean, part here again, we're just sort of showing, you know, why it actually matters. You have more than one engineer, of course, also explaining some of the hazards, you know, actually having a bit too close here, but there are other considerations to keep in mind. Many other considerations, which actually also, again, impact many other things, again, like actually getting your tanks back into the fight. Here's another quick little bit of tactical theory to keep in mind, although this is not the best example, still sort of what I best could find throughout my replays. Again, you know, all about looking through, and sometimes it takes ages, so you sort of cut a corner here and there. But again, the overall idea, what I basically want to point out here for this part of the Propagandacast Lehr is actually the idea of prioritizing, or I suppose you could call it triage. That is, you know, you actually sort of figure out, you know, again, you focus on the immediate issue. In this case, of course, I mean, imagine if this Panzer had been more damaged again. I mean, then hanging about repairing 2 tanks at the same time is not really good. In fact, it's pretty bad, because again, it basically means both tanks will take quite some time before they actually hit the field. Whereas again, if you sort of focus on one tank, then you at least got that ready for the fight. I mean, in this case, you know, I mean, if we imagine that, again, the Panzer IV was considered more damaged than the Tiger 1, but still was stretched in 2, and then, of course, the Tiger was stretched in 1, I mean, there's sort of, you know, should, you know, one go for the Panzer IV, the Tiger, and that would then depend on your needs, but again, you know, sort of prioritize, figure out what do you actually need on the field first. I mean, the fight might then, of course, require you get the Tiger up, but then you focus on the Tiger and quickly get into the fight, or then you, of course, go, well, I actually need the Panzer IV, and then you get that into the fight. But again, having 2 tanks and then sort of trying to repair them at the same time with only 1 squad of pioneers, I mean, overall, it's not very effective, and ultimately, again, we'll just sort of both have your tanks out of the fight again for about, you know, 2.5 minutes to 5 minutes to whatever, and again, ultimately, you know, allowing your opponent to have free reign all across the rest of the map. So again, you know, prioritize your repairs, figure out what you actually want to do. And of course, as the Soviets, you do have some sort of tricks to alleviate that through doctrines, because the Soviets have a lot more than just, you know, the repair engineers. Once, you know, doctrines come into play, they have self-repair, which basically just allows you to expend a bit of munitions to tank repair, something called speed it up with having additional troops repair it. You've got conscript repairs, which again allows you to bring combat troops into the bit then repair, which again you can allow many more troops to repair much quicker. That's also another effect. And of course, you've got Soviet industry with its own repair stations, which again also that way allow you. So in that regard, you know, it's probably much more relevant for the Germans sort of again prioritize with their own pioneers, and again the Soviets many that way, you know, have some ways to sort of dodge that a bit, but even then it probably still stands. Again, you know, if you, for example, have several IS-2s, then you, for example, want the one that's, you know, going to be able to have the most impact right away, for example. So those are also vital things to consider and keep in mind when, you know, figuring out what to repair and why to repair it. All of these little things will actually help you in the long run, because again, you can you know, keep your tanks more combat operational, but it's also about, you know, ensuring you have something to defend your front line, because the longer time your tank is away from the front line, of course, that's more time for your opponent to have fun, for example, without your tank to be there to intervene. I mean, I won games because my opponent basically had to keep his tanks at his base and couldn't even have anything repairing it, which pretty much allowed me to move ahead without having to worry about my opponent's tanks. So, I mean, it's actually quite important that these things, you know, quickly get sorted out for yourself, because then again, there's less room for your opponent to freely maneuver about without having to worry about, you know, the vengeance of the Panzer or the tank. So try, you know, and work on that yourself again. Prioritize, triage, figure out what you actually want to sort of get out fixed first, and then get it done. You'll suddenly find yourself with at least some combat-ready Panzers more of the time. Otherwise. And again, that's going to allow you to keep up much better pressure, at least, you know, hold back an opponent's assault a bit better and punish it a bit more. So try and keep that in mind as well. And moving on here to the last little bit. So we're making a little jump here now. And here to the last bit of this Propagandacast Lehr on repair tactics. A little bit of advice and sort of, you know, helping yourself towards repairs, and also avoid some unfortunate losses while repairing. One little trick, of course, is actually to equip your pioneers with a flame, and that way actually, or engineers, of course, and that way actually speed them up to get some kills, but also veterancy. Of course, in one sense, of course, it requires you to pay a bit more attention to them, but again, if you can actually get them up to veterancy too, for starters, they actually begin repairing faster. And that's usually something you want, because again, that helps you get your tank even faster back into the fight. So in that regard, that's a little neat thing to remember. Of course, pioneers with flamethrowers are not just valuable because, you know, they can kill stuff fast in buildings and such, but again, also in later game, where the flamethrower perhaps might be a little less useful, the unit will still have the veterancy, which can then be applied towards repairing your armor, vehicles, anti-tank guns, mortars, all that rubbish. So that, for example, is a little trick. And of course, in that regard, the Germans do have a little thing that can actually help them with that, in terms of doctrines, according to that is elite troops with its troop training ability. Pop that on some pioneers to get veterancy 3. I think veterancy 3 helps them repair fast, but also, you know, it ensures they are a little less vulnerable when actually repairing while in combat. And of course, that's going to be a little less focus here, you know, repairing under combat. Generally, you don't want to be doing, although there are some places where you can get away with it. And what are those places, you wonder? For example, when you're dealing with tank destroyers, because they do not have splash damage, they do not have anything that can actually hurt the nearby infantry from repairing. Had this, for example, been an IS-152, an IS-2, or anything with a nice splash damage, this would have been a bad idea. Also, you know, if you actually know your opponent has artillery nearby, then that is also a very bad spot to repair. Because, again, those units standing out there are extremely vulnerable unless they're veterancy free. They will basically just get splattered across your tank, ruining the paint job as well, or at least turning it a very nice crimson. So keep that in mind as well, you know, while conducting repairs. Is this place under artillery? And if I'm actually going to do a combat or fighting other stuff, can that stuff actually kill my infantry reasonably? Again, are you fighting tank destroyers or something like that, very specifically minded towards it, like, or Panthers for that matter, since it's also a little splash damage? No worries. But again, as soon as you move on to things with considerable splash damage, then it becomes very, very hazardous territory and can easily end up with you losing a lot of pioneers for no good reason. So generally, this is not something you should be aiming for, but again, in some cases can be done. So, little thing there to sort of try and keep in mind. You know, again, flamethrowers for sort of basically in the longer term getting you some better repair pioneers or engineers. And otherwise, you know, considering what you're actually fighting against before sending in pioneers to repair in the heat of combat. So, hope you enjoyed this Propagandacast. I hope this enlightened you on the matters of repairs. I hope this gave you deep understanding. I hope this will help you in your future battles and hopefully bring you a bit more enjoyment out of the game. This is Imperial Dane saying cheers, and feel free to share this with as many of your friends as you know. And of course, feel free to subscribe if you haven't already.